Good day, everyone. We will be discussing the first chapter, which is about the indigenous psychology. But before that, we will first have a recap about the Filipino psychology or the Psikologiyang Pilipino. If you still remember, Ma'am Nerissa defined Psikologiyang Pilipino as a study of concepts and methods in the field of culture and psychology, giving meaning to psychological reality based on the language and worldview of the Filipino. Psikologiyang Filipino, it involves the experiences, ideas, and cultural orientation of the Filipinos. It focuses on the different themes such as identity and national consciousness, social awareness and involvement, national and ethnic, cultures and languages, and the application of Indigenous, which will be discussed later. But before that, alamin na muna natin kung sino nga ba ang ama ng Psikolohiyang Pilipino. Virgilio Gaspar Enriquez is the father of Filipino psychology or ama ng Psikolohiyang Pilipino. He also known as Doc E or Dr. Enriquez, and he was a social psychologist. But before he became a social psychologist, he first studied the course Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy from the University of the Philippines in 1961. Then by 1966, he pursued a master's degree in Northwestern University in Evanston. Then, after that, he then decided to have a doctorate degree in social psychology. And next one, he is the founder of the Pambansang Samahan ng Psikolohiyang Pilipino, and its corporate name is the National Association for Psikolohiyang Pilipino. So, before daw, nung hindi pa nasisimulan ni Enriquez ang Psikolohiyang Filipino, hindi daw masyadong napagbibigyan masyado ng focus dahil nahihirapan ang mga Filipino researchers or Filipino psychologists noon mag-interpret ng Western psychology due to the fact na nakaset ito into English language. Kaya, Enriquez inspired Filipino researchers with the concept of Western research methods in psychology, and it have broadened the view of cross-cultural psychology. Let's come now to the indigenous psychology. What is indigenous psychology? Indigenous psychology is a system of knowledge based on paradigms that originate in particular localities and cultures. It is the scientific study of human behavior or mind that is native, that is not transported from other regions, and that is designed for its people. So, indigenous psychology can also be understood as a form of cultural reclamation and cultural survival. Bakit kaya na-understood din siya as a form of cultural reclamation and cultural survival? This is because indigenous psychology is also used for studying the impact of political, economic, religious, and social aspects as a specific society. What is the relationship between the indigenous psychology and Filipino psychology? So, as what I've said earlier, ang indigenous psychology, it is a system of knowledge based on paradigms that originate in particular localities and cultures. And in Filipino psychology naman, it refers to the psychology born out of the experience, thought, and orientation of the Filipinos based on the full use of Filipino culture and language. It has also a contribution sa pag-increase sa social acceptance, for psychological disorders and initiative for seeking effective treatments. Next, let's come now to the global indigenous psychology. Indigenous psychology is an intellectual movement across the globe based on the following factors. First, indigenous psychology is a reaction against the colonization or hegemony of Western psychology. Hegemony means power or dominance. If you remember, may nabanggit ako kanina regarding sa pag-convince and influence ni Enriquez sa mga Filipino researchers natin. Filipino researchers na gamitin as reference ang Western studies, the Western psychology, which means it tells na ang Western psychology has more study already, which makes it dominant. Ayun. So next is the need for non-Western cultures to solve their local problems through indigenous practices and applications. So sa pagkakaintindi ko, indigenous psychology has something to do with solving the local problems of the non-Western countries. So knowing na ang Philippines ay kasama siya sa mga non-Western countries. And lastly, the last factor is that the need for a non-Western culture to recognize itself in the constructs and practices of psychology.
So next one, yung difference with cross-cultural, cultural, ethnopsychology, and Volcker psychology. So yung una is the cross-cultural. So yung cross-cultural, study of similarities and differences in behavior among individuals who have developed in different cultures. So sa cross-cultural kasi, branch siya ng psychology na nag-i-examine ng cultural influences na naka-affect sa process and behavior. So dito sa branch of psychology na to, ine-explore niya yung patterns between the various culture. So ang main function ng cross-cultural is to determine how various cultures affects human behavior. And yung goal nito is to identify how culture impacts thought process, behavior, goals, and social experiences. Next is the cultural, seeks to understand how forces of society and culture influence individual thoughts, feelings, and behavior. So, ine-explore ng cultural psychology yung general relationship between the thought of process, behaviors, and culture. Ine-investigate kasi kung paano yung cultural na naka-influence sa mind natin and how the mind helps to create cultural influences. So, kasama na dyan yung pag-study ng identity, yung child development, yung emotions, and romantic relationships.
So next one is the ethnopsychology. Ethnopsychology is a discipline that studies the psychology and behavior of the people of a particular ethnic community. So ang ethnopsychology, nagfo-focus lang siya sa pag-undergo ng isang research or study sa isang particular ethnic community. So knowing that in the Philippines, ang ethnic group sa bansa natin ay the Tagalog, Cebuano, Ilocano, Bicolano, Kapampangan, Maranao, Maguindanao, and Tausug. Ayun. So next one is about the Volcker psychology. So Volcker psychology is a method of psychology that was founded in the 19th century by the famous psychologist Wilhelm Wundt. It was distinct in its use of historical and comparative methods. So prefer niya na historical and comparative method yung ginagamit niya. Nagko-compare siya ng two studies or more rather than magsagawa ng isang laboratory experimentation.
So next one is the types of indigenization. So meron tayong dalawa. Yung una is the indigenization from without, transporting psychological theories, concepts, and methods and modifying them to fit to local cultural context. So meaning, yung local cultural, nag-influence siya from America and other parts of Asia. Like the Catholic traditions, kasi tayong mga Filipino, we value traditions and cultures. So nag-i-involve siya it involves the transfer of Western psychological, yung methods, yung concepts, and yung theories, and imomodify yon to fit, kung fit ba siya sa local culture. And next is the indigenization from within, yung culture as a source of knowledge to come up with cross-cultural knowledge. So yung pinaka-main source talaga is the culture. So meaning you are able to communicate with other people's culture and about experiencing, interacting in foreign culture, and marirecognize mo yung individual differences ng culture nila. And you have a knowledge na magkaroon kung paano ba yung kultura ng isang bansa ngaya, and you interact with people and belief system. So, yun.
In addition lang din sa indigenization from within, it means that sources of knowledge are influenced by the concepts of existing cultures, then adapted in general. In order for other people to interpret as knowledge coming from other lines of cultures, this in then constitutes to the cross-cultural knowledge that exists within. Ayun.
So, yung development of indigenous concept and theory. So, meron tayong apat. So, the first one is rethinking Filipino values. So, kasama na dyan yung bahala na, hiya, and utang na loob. So, yung sa bahala na, it's the Filipino culture na it defines as Filipino attitude na we accept suffering, problems, and leave everything to God. So, in psikolohiyang perspective, iba yung pag-i-interpret niyan. So, yung bahala na, it means sa psikolohiyang Pilipino, they are not giving their faith to God. And it remain passive. So meaning they are telling themselves na they are ready to face the difficult situation and will do their best to achieve na yung objectives sa isang situation niya. And next is the hiya, which is translated as shame. It's the uncomfortable feelings that accompanies awareness of being in a socially unacceptable position. So, meron siyang different meanings yung hiya. Depende sa situation. Yung nakakaya, embarrassing. Yung napahiya, placed in an awkward position. Yung ikinahiya, be embarrassed with someone. And in positive naman, yung mahiyain or yung shy. It can be either positive or negative. So, yung utang na loob, it's the depth of gratitude. It's when yan yung it's an individual that helps another, and the person helped then feels an obligation to repay the debt in the future. So, yung iba kasi yung utang na loob, parang sa ngayon kasi parang nagiging Filipino toxic culture na yan. So, next is the indirect communication or yung pakikiramdam. So, yung pakikiramdam, yan yung, it's another aspect of Filipino personality na binigyan ng atensyon ng psikolohiyang Pilipino. So, part kasi ng socialization natin yung pagiging sensitive sa non-verbal cues. So, we have a concern for the feeling of others and desirable skills na yan natin. So, kasi tayong mga Filipino, para sabi daw, magaling daw tayong makiramdam. We are aware and sensitive sa attentive sa nonverbal behavior. So, ang pakikiramdam kasi according to the article na nabasa ko, yung Asian Association of Psychology, yung pakikiramdam it's very useful kapag nagko-conduct daw ng research, especially sa rural areas. And another example, kasi tayo mga Filipino, we find it difficult to refuse nga kapag nagpa-participate nga tayo, for example, sa interview or sa survey. Kapag meron kang pakikiramdam, madali mong sabihin from their body language or tone of their voice. And kaya it's very important na magkaroon ka ng time na maging comfortable sa iyo isang tao, magkaroon ng experience makipag-usap sa iyo para magkaroon ng opinions and knowledge. So, parang madali mo siyang kapag kilala mo na talaga yung isang tao, madali mo siyang maramdaman kung ano yung nafe-feel niya. So, internal, externality. So, sa internal and externality, yan yung sa puri at dangal. And yung puri, it refers to honor, that through compliments or applauses for a good character or yung performance. So, yung dangal naman is honor from within. So, it means na ina-acknowledge mo yung isang tao through their character or yung achievement nila and success. It can be acknowledged through an award or a tribute. So, yung great cultural divide, sa example nito, it's about, as Filipino ngayon, we read comics in popular illustrated magazines in Filipino, nakikinig and nanonood tayo sa mga soap opera sa television and radio. So, part ng cultural divide natin kasi na according to Enriquez, yung pag-visit natin sa Indigenous healer. So, yung mga albularyo niya for both physical and mental or emotional ailments.
So the next one is about the levels of indigenization. Okay, so the first level of indigenization is called the fear of the unknown. Ang ibig sabihin daw nito ay tayo daw na mga individual, we are afraid what we don't seem to understand. But it is only natural for us individuals to experience fear for those who do not understand a concept that we might face. So next level of indigenization is called the fear of change. So ang ibig sabihin daw nito is that kasi as we know, change is a constant factor in person's lifetime. So it can be through their their own life, our own life in terms of actions, experiences, and many more. But some of us are afraid that we might undergo change due to the reason that we are afraid that we may not get used to easily the changes that are made within our lives. Ayun. So next one is called the fear of losing control and power. Ang ibig sabihin daw nito ay tayo daw namang individual, we tend to think that we are the most powerful species in the planet. That is why we have that mindset that we are superior. Naandyan yung superiority natin. Kaya, what if fear of losing control shifts in our mind? So probably, this fear invites many unwarranted attitudes towards the aspect of us, human being. So next one is called the resisting process. So dito naman sa resisting process, it is the stage where there missed opportunities for actions that would circumvent indigenization. Yung may capability din naman yung isang individual, pero merong wall, merong obstacle na nagpapahinto dito sa layunin ng isang tao or goal para ma-achieve niya yung isang bagay. And then the last one is called the rejecting and asserting control. So we have this called freedom, a freedom to justify the things we want and we don't want. We have the freedom to have a control on what things we consider or agree with and things we need to reject. Ayun.
So next is the basis for indigenous national psychology. Yan. So early or traditional psychology. So dito sa early or traditional psychology, part siya ng Western psychology na it focuses about the human brain and mind. Kasama na din dyan yung emotional feeling and human logic. Kasi sa Western psychology kasi, it's study the inner of our minds during centuries. And next is man and diwa. So yung diwa kasi, it's yan yung kaisipan natin dahil sa diwa, bumubuo yan sa isang tao. So siya yung rason kung bakit marunong tayong umunawa, makiramdam, saka yung pagiging mga tuwiran. And next is psychology of pagbabagong isip. Kasi dito sa psychology of pagbabagong isip, nakadepende siya sa belief na kung anong meron tayo. Nagbabago siya time to time. For example, from the evil thought and change to do good for good reason. And next is the social issue and problem. So, pinaka-main major social issue talaga natin is the COVID. Kasi dahil sa problema na yan, yung coronavirus na spread worldwide, and there are many people suffering to fight the virus. And yung iba naman nawalan ng trabaho dahil sa pandemic, and meron naman ngayon, it's hard for us to adjust the new normal. So,